Hello everyone! Last week we began the story of Xavius, where we talked about his time as counselor to Queen Azara, his transformation into a satyr, until he was eventually defeated by Malfurion as he turned Xavius into a tree. This would not be the end of Xavius' story though. Despite Malfurion trying to turn him from something evil into something that would nurture life, Xavius found new, dark, powerful allies. But before we dive into that part of the story, we first need to talk about some events not directly about Xavius, but still very important to his story. Let's begin, shall we? At the end of the War of the Ancients, the demonic forces of the Burning Legion were sent back to the Twisted Nether, and the Well of Eternity was incredibly unstable. This caused the Sundering, splitting the land of Kalimdor apart and turning it into what we know it as today, with the Maelstrom in the middle. Even though the well was gone, Illidan had managed to fill several vials with water from the well, and he used those vials to create a new well, a new fountain of power. He knew that one day the Legion would come back and that they would have need of this power. Now the Night Elves, they obviously didn't like this idea. They were fearful of the causing another War of the Ancients, so they imprisoned Illidan for life while also planting the great tree Nordersil over the well. The tree would make sure to contain the powers of the well as preventing it from growing, while the dragon aspects blessed the tree, giving the Night Elves, amongst other things, immortality and access to the Emerald Dream. I mentioned the Emerald Dream last week as a path for Malfurion to fight back against Xavius, but I didn't go into details as to what the Emerald Dream is. Basically, it's a different realm, home to and guarded by the green dragon aspect Ysera, her fellow green dragons, as well as other creatures of nature like Cenarius, Ancients of War, and even the Druids. It's created by the Titans, said to have originated from an area called the Rift of Aln, which is also connected to the Twisted Nether and the Great Dark Beyond. Is described as the blueprint of Azeroth, looking the way Azeroth would be as the Titans shaped it, without life changing it. For example, where in Azeroth you would see Stormwind, in the Emerald Dream you would see the land as it was first shaped by the Titans, most likely trees and grass and no Stormwind there. Now the Titans didn't shape the world instantly, it happened in stages, creating many different layers within the dream. Where in Azeroth you'd see a mountain, for example, changed by wind and rain, in the dream you see it unaltered, and diving deeper into those layers, you see the stages in which it was built. As Malfurion has shown, you can use the dream to alter things on Azeroth itself, as he used the dream form to fight Xavius and undo their spell work. Now I know that this is a very vague description of the dream, but that's also because it's a very vague realm. Now after the War of the Ancients and the blessing of Nordersil, Malfurion started to teach others the way of the Druids, and his calling often called him away from his beloved Tyrande, who would not only become the leader of her fellow priests, she also became the leader of the Night Elves. More followed Malfurion's path with nature, and although their Shando, their teacher, would come out of the dream from time to time, mainly to deal with threats like the Worgen or the war against the Satyrs, or even to visit Illidan in his prison, sometimes he was gone for centuries, leaving Tyrande all by herself. She did have means of awakening Malfurion when the need was greatest, and she did so during the most dire of times. The return of the Legion during Warcraft 3 was one of those moments where she needed Malfurion, and he came out of the dream to aid her in their battle. Together, they stood against the Legion, just like they did during the War of the Ancients, and even though it required blowing up Nordersil and giving up their immortality, they were able to defeat the Legion. After this, Malfurion once again returned to the Emerald Dream, while one of his students, Vandrel Stackhelm, he wanted to grow a new world tree to restore the Night Elves' immortality. Malfurion was completely against this idea. He claimed that the nature would never bless such a selfless act, and so for a time, Stackhelm's plans were prevented. However, within the Emerald Dream, Malfurion was captured by a being known only as the Nightmare Lord. This imprisonment prevented him from returning to physical body, forcing Stackhelm to take a position as leader of the Druids. Under his guidance, they grew a new world tree and they called it Teldrassil. Malfurion's body was kept alive by prayers to Elune, his beloved Tyrande, hoping and wishing for him to return, yet his spirit remained absent. Trapped within the Emerald Dream, Malfurion's spirit was tormented by the Nightmare Lord. His spirit turned into a tree, which caused him agonizing pain, but even worse, his powers now fed the Nightmare, giving it the strength to infect the Emerald Dream, turning it into the Emerald Nightmare. Now some of you might have already guessed it, but the Nightmare Lord was actually Xavius. As the world sundered after the War of the Ancients, he felt the world's pain burning through him, yet he had no mouth to scream. He was but a tree, swallowed by the waves, yet deep below he made contact with an ancient evil force. Nuzov, the old god, allied himself with Xavius, and for millennia the tree was nurtured, roots digging deep, the small tree becoming bigger and bigger, until Xavius was strong enough to move out of the water and plant himself firmly within a Jara. That was his connection to the world of Azeroth, but he also gained access to the Emerald Dream, working on turning it into the Nightmare. We've seen hints of the Nightmare's corruption before. For example, the Dragons of Nightmare, world bosses during Classic. These were green dragons corrupted and turned by the Nightmare. The Wailing Caverns dungeon with the druid Naralex was also because of the Nightmare's influence. The green dragon Iranicus, the end boss of the Sunken Temple, another sign of the Nightmare. Over time, its influence became much greater, and even worse, Xavius used his powers to manipulate and corrupt Archdruid Vendrell Staghelm. Using the image of his deceased son, Xavius convinced Staghelm to take a branch of his tree form and plant it firmly in the world tree Teldrassil. This enabled Xavius to corrupt the world tree itself, and under Staghelm's guidance, the other druids they fed the corruption, even though they believed that they did their best to cleanse the tree. Staghelm was also used to keep Malfurion in his dream state by secretly placing Morrow grain collected by adventurers on his body, poisoning him and slowly killing him. It was thanks to the prayers and Elun's blessing that Malfurion had survived for this long, but time was running out. Elun granted Tyrande a vision showing her that Malfurion was truly dying now, and soon enough the events of the novel Stormrage would play out. Xavius' plans of spreading the Nightmare, getting revenge and claiming dominance over both Azeroth and the Emerald Dream, they came closer to fruition, but not all was lost. Not quite yet. Malfurion was in great pain, tortured by the Nightmare and visions for a very long time, but he used his skills to manipulate events and work against his jailer. This brings us to the events that played out within the novel Stormrage sometime after the defeat of the Lich King. The story in the book is complicated with a lot of characters, a lot of backstory, so I have to focus on the important bits and try to focus it on Xavius. In the dream, Malfurion was captured, but he knew of one magical weapon that would be able to free him. This weapon, the Axe of Broxigar, Cenarius' axe, crafted by Malfurion himself and blessed by the demigod Cenarius for the orc Broxigar to wield it against the Legion. Broxigar lost his life holding off the dark titan Sargeras during the War of the Ancients, but the weapon itself is returned to the red dragon Coriastras, who was then sent back to his own time period by the bronze dragon Nosdormu. He then gave the weapon to War Chief Thrall, explaining what had happened to Broxigar, and through dreams, shamans were told to give the axe to Broxigar's niece Fura, and Thrall listened to their words. These dreams were actually sent by Malfurion, who needed the weapon to break free, so after manipulating those events, he worked on manipulating Fura. He sent her nightmares about how he betrayed Broxigar and killed her uncle. Through her dreams, he burned the fake image in her mind, and Fura knew that she had to avenge Brox and save the world from the menace known as Malfurion. The druids did not enjoy manipulating the female orc, but he had no other choice. As the nightmare spread, Fura eventually managed to make her way into the dream, to the very location where Malfurion was a tree. She was about to strike him down, about to complete his plans, but what Malfurion didn't count on was Tyrande showing up as well. She didn't know what was going on, all she could see was an orc trying to strike down Malfurion, so she prevented the orc from doing what had to be done. Malfurion tried to scream and warn Tyrande, but he had no mouth anymore, and he was forced to watch as his plans shattered before him. Luckily, the druid Bro Baremantle had figured out what Malfurion wanted to happen, and he distracted Tyrande long enough for Fura to strike, not kill Malfurion, but break the spell and bonds that held him captive. Gaining his freedom back was not going to be that easy though. The Nightmare Lord had no intention of letting Malfurion go, and shadowy tendrils wrapped themselves around the Archdruids. To his rescue came the Green Dragonflight with the leader Ysera herself, rescuing him, but by doing so, opening herself to be captured instead. Cursing himself, Malfurion realized that he'd been played by the Nightmare Lord. First, he was used as a tool to empower the Nightmare, and now he'd been used as bait to trap the Green Dragon aspect and add her formidable powers to the Nightmare. With renewed strength, the darkness led by Xavius assaulted them, and the Green Dragons realized that they had to get out of there. Malfurion wanted to desperately go back and do something, anything to save Ysera, but the Green Dragon holding him wouldn't let him go. Ysera had told them that rescuing Malfurion was everything, that he was more valuable than even she was. The druid could not believe it, kept on struggling to go back, but in doing so, he accidentally left the Emerald Dream and he returned to his physical body, which was resting within the Moonglade. He could feel the poison of the mortal grain in his system, used his scales to collect it, and he puked it out. He was weak, but the nightmare and mist that accompanied it was everywhere around him. There was no time for rest, he could not give up hope, so he shifted into his crow form and he flew towards Teldrassil. With Ysera captured, the powers of the nightmare increased, and with it, the effects upon the world of Azeroth. Mist was spreading through the land, and people would no longer wake up from their slumber. Sylvanas Windrunner, for example, she was trapped in a nightmare where she regained her mortal body, only to be slain and turned by the Lich King over and over again. There were more, like Jaina, Cairn, Anduin, all across the world. People and creatures became trapped in their dreams, in their nightmares, unable to wake up, and in turn, their fears they fed the nightmare, making it even more powerful. Those that were able to resist falling asleep, they put up quite a fight, but not only was the nightmare an incorporeal enemy, it turned their loved ones against them. Varian Rin, for example, he saw the face of his son and his dead wife Tiffin in the mist. Those sleeping were used as soldiers, imagining that they were fighting the greatest terrors, but in reality, they were fighting their former countrymen, their allies and loved ones. Not willing to strike them down, the defenders tried to knock them out instead, but sometimes there was no other choice and blood had to be drawn. Xavius' powers became stronger and stronger with each victim he took. The boundaries between the Emerald Nightmare and Azeroth itself became thinner, and something had to be done soon before all would be lost to the nightmare. The first small victory came as Malfurion reached Teldrassil, and he figured out that Stakhelm had become corrupted, that Xavius had used the image of his dead son to whisper in his ears. He confronted his former student, convinced the druids that Stakhelm was actually working against them, and they overpowered him. Malfurion also discovered the branch that was intertwined with Teldrassil. He removed it and used his powers to now properly heal the World Tree. He urged its roots to dig deep, reaching the most pure parts of Azeroth and feed from it, heal itself from the corruption that plagued it. With the World Tree healed, Malfurion was able to tap into it and see all of Azeroth at once. So far had the roots grown. The scale of the corruption became clear to him, but he was also able to find and reach out to those that were still fighting against it. He knew that the only way to truly fight back was to do so in the Emerald Dream, so he told all those willing to follow his guidance to lay down their arms and allow him to guide them into the dream. Under Varian Rin's leadership, the different factions of both the Alliance and the Horde, but also the animals like tigers and raptors, they banded together with those still trying to defend the dream. Keepers, guardians, ancients of war, all those able were summoned to war, and together they stood against the darkness within the dream. Together they stood against the shadow. Their might not be able to conquer the nightmare, but at least it drew some of Xavius' attention. Meanwhile, Ysera, the green dragon aspect, she had done her very best to fight back herself, to prevent Xavius from using her powers. This titanic struggle was taxing on her though, but she was eventually liberated by her consort Irenicus, and even though she was too weak to offer aid further, at least she could no longer be used by Xavius. Malfurion was shocked to hear that she of the dream would not be there to guide or aid him, but she assured him that it was he who was most important. He held the power within to save this world. He was both part of the dream and Azeroth itself, the key to their salvation. She told him this just before she passed out, and Ysera would be right. In the end, Malfurion and Tyrande, they reunited, and despite Malfurion trying to send her away to keep her safe, Tyrande told him that she would not let him go again, and that they were in this together until the bitter end. With Tyrande at his side, they found the location on Azeroth where Xavius' tree form was, and Malfurion wondered how this could have happened without anyone sensing it, but he figured that Xavius' allies, the ones who allowed him to infect the dream and spread the darkness, the old god N'Zoth, was the one who had shielded him. Naturally, Xavius was not about to give up his quest for dominance, quite the opposite. With renewed vigor, the Nightmare struck out at the army united in the dream, at Tyrande and Malfurion, and even at Fura and Bro Bearmantle, who had made their way to Xavius' dream form with the intention of cutting it down. With the might of the Old God behind him, Xavius struck out, but it wouldn't be enough. With Tyrande stealing him, protecting him, the powers of Elune and her love at his side, Malfurion dug deep. He called upon the powers of the world itself, drew upon his fellow druids, the World Tree, Teldrassil, and even Nordrassil. With the barrier between the dream and Azeroth weakening, he was able to split himself from his mortal body, acting on both planes simultaneously. He called forth the power of nature, forming a massive storm with thunder, loud thunder, so loud that all of Azeroth could hear it, from the highest mountains to the lowest caves. The sound of thunder broke the spell, and the dreamers woke up from their nightmare, but their fear and confusion, it was still empowering it. With Tyrande's aid and Elune's blessing, the stormy rain poured over the people, soothing their spirits and calming their minds. The storm rolled over the world of Azeroth as Malfurion pushed it on, ready to unleash its power against the towering tree in front of him. In the dream, Fura was ready, and Malfurion told it exactly where to strike. As the axe of Cenarius dug deep into the shadowy tree form, emerald lightning struck the physical one again and again and again. "My lord," Xavius abruptly shouted, "hear me!" But Malfurion felt the ancient darkness abandon its vile servant. Although he wanted it that, the Archdruid dared not lessen his efforts against Xavius. He knew too well that if any spark remained, Xavius' evil would rise again, and in a form likely even more terrible. The entire terrible ordeal would begin anew. As Fura struck the tree, in the dream for the third time, the shadow tree faded into nothing. On Azeroth, the true tree shook, withered and decayed, until only a rotted trunk remained. The bitter, angry voice of Xavius, of the Nightmare Lord, thundered in the Archdruid's thoughts. "Malfurion Stormrage, I will never leave you. I will ever be your nightmare. Xavius, once counselor to Queen Azora, once first amongst the satyrs, once the Nightmare Lord, was at last no more. After this, Malfurion pushed on just a little further to cleanse the world of Azeroth completely, and then he focused on the Emerald Dream, cleansing it entirely, but he found that he could only push it back so far. Within an area of the dream called the Rift of Aln, he could push it no further, and he felt the ancient evil he had sensed empowering Xavius before. He realized that there was nothing more to gain from trying to push it further, and instead decided to seal off the vicinity around the rift, knowing that the day was saved, but one day they would have to fight this war. Those that fought in the defense of the dream, they would return to the bodies, while those forever slain, they were made more attuned to the dream, for that would be their realm. Tron and Malfurion decided that the millennia spent apart was plenty. It was time to stop letting things push them away from each other. They got married, and the Archdruid now stood at the side of his beloved. However, not even this tale would mark the end of Xavius, but before we talk about that, I must give you a spoiler warning. Those that have been avoiding Legion spoilers and you don't want to know what's going to happen in that expansion, now would be the time to turn off the video. Before you go though, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the story so far. For those that are sticking around, the first sign of the Nightmare's return, it came from a most unexpected source. When you kill Archimond on heroic or mythic difficulty, he'll drop an item called Remnant of Chaos, which we then return to Malfurion at the Moonglade. He cleanses it at Lake Elunara and tells us that he has encountered his power once before within the depths of the Emerald Dream near an abyss known as the Rift of Aln. At the time, they tried to seal it away, but this item shows that they failed, and even more problematic is that it came from the hands of Archimond, the first signs of the old gods teaming up with the Legion. On the Legion Alpha, within Val'sharah, the area where Malfurion was first trained in the ways of the Druids, we discover that the Xavius and the Nightmare has returned. The Nightmare is spreading across the land, has claimed the demigod Cenarius, and even though we do our very best, we fail to cleanse him from his corruption, Malfurion gets captured again, and even the green dragon aspect Ysera is taken by the Nightmare. Together with Tyrande, we ride out in an attempt to save Malfurion, but Xavius is a schemer and he's ready for us. He gives the priestess a choice. She can either sit at Malfurion's side as he draws his final breath, or she can watch the temple of her goddess burn as Yogg-Saron is sent out to destroy it. For Tyrande, the choice is not easy, but it's easily made. She has sworn herself to Elune, so she rides out to the temple to defend it, and together we kill the corrupted Yogg-Saron. Malfurion is taken by the image of Xavius into Darkheart Thicket, a dungeon at the roots of the World Tree Shaladrassil, to which we go in, we take on the corrupted beings inside, and we liberate the Archdruids. A well-earned victory, but we have to stay vigilant. Deep inside the nightmare, Xavius remains unvanquished, and this will lead us into the Emerald Nightmare raid. The Emerald Nightmare raid is unfortunately not available in its full glory yet, but we can tell from the dungeon journal that Xavius himself is going to be the final boss. Along the way, we'll have to deal with creatures taken by the Nightmare, like the demigod Ursoc, who's taken by Xavius during the Druid Artifact quest, the Dragons of Nightmare, the world bosses that we already defeated during Classic and were taken on again in Stormrage, the demigod Sargeras himself, and perhaps even the dream form of Yogg-Saron. Perhaps she'll make an appearance too. Now, the reason as to how Xavius makes a return, how they manage to corrupt the World Tree Shaladrassil, that's not entirely explained yet, and I hope they'll explain more in the future. It seems like they've taken the events placed within Stormrage, the whole corruption of the land, the Nightmare, and Xavius, and they simply took that and they placed it in game. On the one hand, it's not really original, but on the other hand, it is pretty damn cool to see these events placed in the game and not just locked away in a novel. It also has a lot of potential, especially for the raid encounters in the Nightmare. The way that these are described in the book, all matter of insects crawling over your body, your worst nightmares becoming a reality. There's a lot of cool stuff that they can work with, and I really hope that the Nightmare will get its chance to shine. Considering that they didn't make the X of Cenarius an artifact, perhaps we'll even see Fura make an appearance to once again rumble against Xavius, and I'll be pretty disappointed if the final encounter doesn't end with Malfurion casting some lightning bolts. Come on, that's just tradition. You can't take out Xavius without casting some lightning. Only time will tell what's going to happen with Xavius, but for now, we've reached the end of his story. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and if you want more details, because I simply could not cover every little bit from the novel, pick up the novel Stormrage, or check out my video for the story of Al-Shara. Subscribe if you like my videos, leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and on to next time, guys. See ya!